بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الكريم. So we continue on with the eligible recipients of zakat. So last week we spoke about the people who are eligible to receive zakat. And so now inshallah, we'll continue on and we'll finish those categories. Last time I mentioned there are technically 8 categories, but out of the 8 categories, one is automatically by the unanimous consent of or unanimous decision of the Sahaba, they were already removed, and that was the mu'allafat qulubuhum, the people who were given due to either warding off their evil or to bring them closer towards Islam. Right? That's that first category. Then we spoke about faqir, we spoke about miskin, and then we spoke about amilin, those who work for the zakat. Now we'll talk about the fourth category. The fourth category is وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, right? As Allah Ta'ala defines in the Quran, وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, that the slaves, right? So now the slaves, he mentions that this is not just referring to any type of slaves, but rather this is referring to those slaves who are contracted with their owners or their masters to receive their freedom. Right? Now, I believe I spoke about this before, right? The concept of slavery in Islam. Did I speak about this? No, I did it. Okay, let's talk about it quickly right now then. Concept of slavery in Islam, right? See, the thing is, whenever people hear the word slave, they have a very negative perception of it, right? And so, which is justly and it's justified, right? Because of the situation that happened throughout the world and the people of the West, especially, going to different countries and enslaving certain people and then abusing them and essentially mistreating them and so on and so forth, right? So that's the perception that we all generally have when we use the word slave. And that's why some people, they don't like translating riqab as slaves because of this negative connotation, this perception that people have regarding the slaves, right? The Western concept of it. Generally, some scholars, they don't even like translating riqab into slaves. Now, why? Because riqab are so different than just slaves and how the slaves were treated here and how they were abused. Now, in Islam, slavery is you can only become a slave in one way. A person can be a slave in one way, and that is through war. Right? You cannot just go to a random country, right, and say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to take you all and I'm going to exploit you, right? Especially based on the color of your skin. You cannot do that, right? You cannot just go. So in Islam, the only way for people to be taken as slaves is through war. Now, why is that allowed? Right? Why is that allowed? Because Islam technically, I mean, it allows it, right? Now, why is it allowed? So just let's go through the scenarios, right? When you are at war with another group of people, right? What happens? If the Muslims are the victors, what happens? Now, there are a couple of scenarios, right? Regarding the ones who are defeated. So now let's say there are obviously two armies, right? They're fighting because obviously warfare nowadays is different than warfare back then, right? Nowadays, if you look around the world, most warfare is done with these drones, with these types of things. Very seldom is it actual physical. You have like small combats, but generally warfare nowadays is what? Drones, bombs, and these types of things, right? And that's why you have indiscriminate killing of men, women, and children, and so on, which of course Islam is against as well. Right? Islam is against indiscriminate killing. But let's go back to this concept of slavery, right? So, and that's a different story of indiscriminate killing. That's a different story. But let's come back to this subject, right, of slavery. So now, you have two armies, the Muslim army and the non-Muslim army, right? Muslim army defeats the non-Muslim army, right? When they say defeat, what does that mean? Does defeat mean you kill every single person? No. Generally, what happens is a good number of people are killed from one side, and so that side surrenders, and the remaining. So let's say, for example, there were 10,000 people on each side, and the non-Muslim army, 3,000 are killed. So the remaining 7,000, they realize that they cannot defeat the 10,000, and so they surrender, right? Generally, that's how it used to happen, right? Or the leaders killed, generally, or the leader cannot be, there's no replacement for the leader, for example, right? And so then generally the war ends, right? Or that battle ends. And so now you have, for example, let's, again, taking those numbers, let's say you have 7,000 people, for example, right? Now, what do you do with those 7,000? You have a couple of options. The first option is what? You kill all of them. That's the first option. Now, that's barbaric. I mean, you're killing 7,000 people. 7,000 people are just dead. But that is an option. But it is a barbaric option and inhumane generally. You don't really do something like that. People who are surrendering generally, people don't kill the ones who surrender. So that's a barbaric option. Number two is what? Number two is that you let them go. Now, is that a smart decision? No, it's not a smart decision. You let them go. Tomorrow, they're going to come with 15,000 and they'll kill your 10,000. Yes. So that's also not a good option. The third option is that you, no, before I go into this, the third option is that you imprison them. You imprison them. So you put them in your own jails, right? Now, who pays for those jails? We do. The Muslims do. The taxpayers, right? So it comes out of who? The Baytul Mal. It comes out of the Baytul Mal. So that's a problem also. Why? Because we see the system, what's happening now. Mass incarceration, right? In America, we are leading in what? Mass incarceration and incarcerations per capita, right? So that's the fact, unfortunately, right? You have mass incarceration. Many of these jails are privately funded, for example. So then they exploit the prisoners and so on and so forth, right? So it becomes an entire scheme. Understand? So therefore, imprisonment, either it's, even if you maintain it, even if you maintain the prison, what happens? Who is the one that's maintaining the prison? The taxpayers, the people, the Muslims, right? So that's a big burden. Now you're taking care of 7,000 people. That's hard. That's very hard, right? And then you have a fourth option. A fourth option, well, you can kind of make this into 5 options, right? Generally, I make 4, but you can make a 5th option, right? Technically, you can include ransom, paying. You can kind of include that in the third category of second category of letting them go. Because yes, you're ransoming them off, but then tomorrow they'll come back. Those people will come back, and again, they'll come back with a larger force and they'll kill you, right? So even if they pay money, they're like, okay, we lost that money. Tomorrow we'll come back with 20,000. We'll kill them and we'll take back the money that we lost. So technically, you can include that in the second category, right? I'm just mentioning it also because that is an option technically, right? The last option is what? Enslavement. That's the last option. Now, when we say enslavement, we don't mean the slavery of the West. Sharia, Islamic riqab, I'll say riqab, right? Not use slavery. Islamic concept of riqab is that you feed the people, you feed the slaves, you feed the riqab from the same food that you eat. And you give them water from the same water that you drink, and you give them clothes from the same clothes that you wear. That's what Islam says about slavery. Is that what was happening in the West? No, not even close. Number one, they were forcibly taken against their will. No war, nothing, just taken, snatched up, right? And then what? They were brought on ships. Many of the Africans, they were killed, right? They were killed. Many people from Africa, this is the reality, right? They're all majority from Africa, right? Or those countries. Other countries, but mainly from Africa, right? So many of them died on the way here because of the inhumane situation on the ships. And then after they were brought here, they were forced into laborious, intensive works. They were not given freedoms and rights and education, none of that, all of these things, right? And that's why, past, 100, that's why you see what's happening nowadays and so on and so forth, right? That's the situation now. Now, Islamic concept of slavery is that what? I believe I did a lecture on this in Jummah or something. I didn't do a fiqh class, but I believe I did a Jummah khutbah on it, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I mentioned it somewhere. Well, anyway, so moving on. So this Islamic concept of slavery is that a person, they are enslaved due to war, and then even after enslavement, you must feed them from the same food that you eat. You give them drink from the same drinks. You give them clothes from the same clothes that you wear as well. Same standard, right? You don't treat them like animals. Na'udhu, they're still humans. And the reason for this, the objective behind it, and one of you guys go inside my office, please, and Just grab my the laptop charger. It's behind the desk. Go, Amr, please. This laptop is gonna die. Okay, so going back, right? Is this what was I saying? Right? So this Islamic concept of slavery, right? It's much different from the Western. At the same time, we encourage freeing the slaves. In many, many, many instances, there is encouragement towards freeing the slaves, right? So there's, for example, if you do this XYZ crime, you must free a slave. If you do this, you must free a slave. If you do this, you should free a slave. And there's so much reward for freeing slaves as well, right? So it's not that, oh, you know what, you have a slave, you should keep that slave and keep them enslaved. No. But rather, there's encouragement to free the slave as well. At the same time, the objective of them being in our communities is to show them the beauty of Islam, to present the beauty. So they're staying with your family, they're staying in your house, they're eating the same food that you're eating, they're drinking, and there's the same clothes. They feel a part of your society, and they're observing the Muslim society, they're learning from the Muslim society, and they're like impressed. Of course, they're impressed. And that's how they, thank you. That's how they continue to, and eventually many people, they accept Islam because of the situation, because of seeing, despite being slaves, after they, what do you call it? After seeing the behavior of the Muslims, many slaves, they also accepted Islam. Not only that, the Mamluks, who became a superpower at the time, they were originally slaves. Many slaves, they were freed and they became what? They became scholars, they became knowledgeable individuals, they became leaders, they became generals, they became even kings or, governors, essentially what you call it, Mamluks, right? And at the same time, lastly, slavery was not based off of the skin color. That's the main thing, right? Slavery is not based off of skin color, it's only based off of war, right? And as I explained it in this manner. Any questions on what I just mentioned? Ji?
7,000 slaves, when they take them, the state takes how the assignment, they give assignment to the individual, or state takes the responsibility?
No, state doesn't take responsibility. They generally divide them amongst the people who participate, the people, the army, the people who participated in the war. Generally, the Amir or the leader, he will distribute, okay, you will get this much, you'll get this much. And as you divide the mali ghanimat, you divide the wealth, you also divide the slaves as well. Okay, so the leader will decide. Any other questions on this topic of slavery? But hopefully I clarified it, inshallah, that Islamic concept of slavery is much different from this Western concept of slavery. And that's why many scholars don't even like using the word slavery for riqab, because of how different it is. Okay. Anyways, I feel I clarified it as in a good way. So inshallah, we will leave it at that. Okay. So remember, Islamic slavery is much different. And that's why we are not apologetic. Some people are like, oh no, people become like, they try to water down the religion, or they try to say, no, this is not a part of our religion. It is a part of our deen. And this is why it is a part of our deen, because the other options are arguably worse, right? The other options of killing them or letting them go or imprisoning them, those are arguably worse. So this is the better option. You keep them with you, you feed them, you give them clothes, you show them the beauty of Islam, and at the same time, you are encouraged to free them. And so when a time comes that you see that these people are productive members of society, they don't have to become Muslim for you to free them. They do not have to become Muslim for you to free them. Rather, you free them. If they want to accept Islam, they accept Islam. They don't. Right? So there's no forced conversions also in Islam. Very important, because many people, they believe that Islam forcibly converts people. No. Islam always gives the options. Right? So just because I touched on war, there's so much more to say, by the way, but just because I touched on it, I'll mention, right? Oftentimes, generally, the wars that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, generally what they engaged in was defensive wars, generally, right? And if there were offensive wars, they were generally because, number one, because the other society was harming, for example, let's say the other armies they were oppressing their, their subjects and so on. So therefore, the Muslim community felt it was their responsibility to go and free those people, right? And yes, history is filled with very oppressive tyrants who would take a lot of taxes and they would abuse their own subjects, and they would kill them. They would do so many things. So Muslims, they would come in and and that's why Islam spread so quickly. How? Was it by the sword? No, Muslims were a very small group of people in Saudi, not Saudi, in the Arab lands. Saudi didn't exist. The Arab lands. So they were very small, and many of them were what? They were unlettered. Many of those people, they didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write. They were basic people. They're very simple people. And one hadith that always gives me goosebumps is Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Nahnu ummatun ummiyun." We are a group of unlettered people. I always get goosebumps whenever I say this hadith. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says we are an unlettered people, meaning this deen is such that it applies, and it's so simple that even an unlettered, uneducated person, they can understand it. And at the same time, it's so vast and comprehensive, and it's so detailed that even if you study 15, 20, 40, 60, your entire life, you will still not understand the entire deen. This is how beautiful our religion is. It's simple, yet complex, both balanced, right? Anyways, so there's much more to speak about, but essentially, when there would be wars, for example, the Muslims, for example, if the Muslims are coming to another group to fight, the three options are generally given. The first option is, listen, if you accept Islam, we will leave you as you are. We will not do anything with you. You pay zakat, and that's it. We will not, we're not going to abuse you. We're not going to kill you. We're not going to fight you, nothing. Accept Islam. This is the message of Islam. This is the truth. Accept it. That's the first thing. Muslims must offer Islam as the first option. If they say, no, we will not accept Islam, say, okay, fine. We will not force you to accept Islam. The second option is what? You pay taxes. Pay taxes, and it's reasonable. You pay taxes. Taxes are generally it's not an unreasonable amount. Generally, it's a reasonable amount similar to zakat. So you're not going to pay zakat, obviously. So pay taxes. Something similar to zakat, you pay a certain amount, and based on a number of factors, you pay a certain amount of money. And if you do that, you'll be under our protection, another Islamic government. And we will protect you. We'll give you all of the rights and responsibilities. We'll give you all of the benefits and amenities of the Muslims as well. And you will remain as non-Muslims. We will not break down your churches. We'll not break down your synagogues and your places of worship. You'll continue worshiping. Just pay some small amount of taxes. Not an exorbitant amount. This is a small amount, similar to zakat. And then the third option is fight. If you will not accept taxes also, then you're refusing to be under our protection. Then we are no longer seeing eye to eye. And so then it leads to war. But before war, Muslims are not like other people where you just go anywhere and kill without any warning, without any statements, just kill them all. So we say we're not barbaric people. We'll offer you the message of Islam, which is the perfect religion. Accept it, alhamdulillah. Even if you accept it just verbally, but you don't believe in your hearts, we will still not fight you. You just say, yes, I accept Islam. We'll say, fine. You accept Islam, we will not kill you. We will not fight you. You are Muslims. Even if you inside you're munafiqeen, that's a different story. We are mukallaf. Nahnu mukallaf bil-zahir. We are held responsible for what's apparent. If you're presenting yourself as a Muslim, we'll accept you to be a Muslim and we'll treat you as a Muslim. Okay? Right? This is a quick summary. Let's move on very quickly. And I'll wrap up in a couple of minutes, inshallah. So the fourth category of eligible recipients of zakat are the slaves. Now, which type of slaves? Those slaves who are contracted with their masters to earn their freedom. So another way to earn freedom is the slave goes to his master and he says, listen, I want to earn my freedom. So what can I do? So the master will say, hey, listen, you work, you give me $10,000 and then you can go free. Right? If I were to quote unquote sell you, I would get 5,000, for example. And so therefore I will give you your freedom if you work and you make $10,000. So then the slave says, okay, fine. The slave goes and he works. He works, and the master has to give him time to work as well. So he gives him a reasonable amount of time, and he goes and he works. Right? And I know these kind of conversations are uncomfortable, but these are important conversations to be had so that people are not scared or shy of Islam. People are not, or nor are people watering down the religion. We are not compromising on Islam at all. We should never compromise on Islam, right? So that's why these conversations, although it's a bit, sometimes uncomfortable, but it is necessary to have. Anyways, so the master says, okay, you can go work. So then he goes work, maybe let's say he does 9 to 5, for example, and he works for a couple months, for example. He earns, every month he's earning $1,000, for example. 10 months he gets his $10,000. He gives it to the master, but he doesn't have any expenses, right? The slave does not have any food expenses, doesn't have any living expenses. What? The master is taking care of it, right? And so then he pays the 10,000, and now he's free. Okay. So now to help that slave pay off his debt, quote unquote, the 10,000, you can give him zakat. Does that make sense? To help the slave pay off the debt or the slavery, you can give him zakat.
They don't have to be Muslim to be eligible zakat.
Yeah, they don't have to be a Muslim to be eligible for that zakat, for this usage. Okay. I think so, actually. I think they have to be Muslim, because if I'm not mistaken, that's one of the conditions of zakat, that they must be Muslim. So I believe they must be Muslim. Now, how would the slave be Muslim? Again, it's possible, right? Let's say someone is born into slavery, for example, or someone was a non-Muslim, then they accepted Islam, because you cannot enslave Muslims, right? You cannot enslave Muslims as Muslims, right?
Yes.
You can, unfortunately, na'udhu billah, so there are scenarios that Muslims did fight Muslims, unfortunately, and that's so sad. It's always very sad when Muslims fight Muslims, unfortunately, but you cannot enslave other Muslims. So the assumption is that they were non-Muslims, and they accepted Islam as slaves, and then now they're Muslims. So to my knowledge, they must be Muslims, to my knowledge, because one of the conditions of giving zakat is that they must be Muslims. I will confirm, but to my knowledge, they must be Muslim. I don't want to take too much time, but yes, leave it for now. But yes, it should be Muslim. Okay, moving on. Let's move on quickly. So mukatab, right? Then you have the gharim, the one who's in debt. So yes, this also, let's talk about this. Man lazima daynun. So this is the person, the fifth category, the one who is in debt. So someone who is in debt, yes, you can give them zakat, right? But the scenario is such that, let's say, for example, now you have two types of people who are in debt. One is a person is in debt and they cannot afford their bare minimum expenses, right? For example, someone is, let's say, living in Bangladesh, for example, right? And they're struggling, right? They're trying to get, they're trying to earn money. They have a job, but even then they cannot make ends meet, and they're forced to borrow money, right? And now they're in debt. Okay. Now they have $5,000 worth of debt. So even if they did not have debt, they would still be eligible, right? But they have, let's say they didn't have that debt, they still have, let's say, very less money, for example, a couple $100, for example, right? So they would still be eligible, but now they're in debt, so it's even worse, right? So in that case, you can give zakat to pay off the debt. That's one scenario. Another scenario is what? Someone lives a lavish lifestyle. They have a very expensive house. They live in America. They live in Virginia, Northern Virginia. They make $100,000 or $200,000, right? They bought a very expensive house, $1 million plus. They bought a very expensive car. So now what? They're living in debt, right? They're in debt for their house. They're in debt for their car. They're in debt for their credit cards. They don't have savings because all of the money that they're getting, they're wasting it, for example. This is a lot more common than you may think. This is actually very common, right? That many people they're just making a lot of money, They're making a lot of money, but there's no barakah. There's no, maybe it could be that job is haram, for example. It could be that there's no barakah. It could be just, whatever reason, right? But they're wasting that money maybe on some other things, whatever it is. But essentially, they're living in debt. In that case, technically, yes, they can still receive zakat, technically. But our scholars, we say that this type of people should not be given zakat too. You should not give zakat to these type of people. Rather, what should happen is that they should downsize. This type of millionaire, for example, I mean, he has $1 million house, right? Although he does not own the house, but he does. I mean, technically, he is partial owner in that house, right? Let's say he's paying off, the mortgages and so on and so forth. So technically, they have money, but inside the house, for example, right? But they don't have cash itself, right? So in that case, what they should do is they should sell that $1 million house. They should sell those expensive cars and downsize to a smaller house, to a cheaper car, and then build up their equity and their wealth. And so then, even if after they do that, they still don't have enough money, then okay, fine. Then you can give them zakat. Going back to the first scenario. Everyone understands? Questions?
But that's type of people. Should we just believe by their words, or we should go investigate them?
So in all scenarios, you should do basic investigation, right? You should ask them basic questions, right? You don't have to do so it depends on, so if let's say a person is, for example, let's say you go to Bangladesh, right? Someone is driving rickshaw, for example, right? Reasonably, you can assume that this person is zakat eligible. So you don't need to ask them questions. Why? Because if he had $7,000 US dollars in cash, would he be driving a rickshaw? Unlikely, right? It's very unlikely, right? And Uber and rickshaw are not the same. Because someone watched my video and said, oh, well, there are people who, they have a lot of money, but they drive Uber. I said, no, Uber and rickshaw are not the same, right? Rickshaw in Bangladesh or other countries is very different from, for example, someone who drives. There are many people who drive Uber in America because they want to. Some people, they drive Uber and they make, mashallah, very good money, mashallah, right? So I told that person, they come from a family, and they drove Ubers, so all of that. So they were trying to see if there was an example. I said, no, there's no example. There's no comparison between someone who's driving Uber or taxis. I know taxi drivers who used to make like 6 figures, who make like hundreds of thousands of dollars, mashallah. It's good, mashallah. Right? Uber, I mean, maybe not so much. Uber takes a lot of fees and stuff like that, but taxis, yeah, mashallah, they used to make a lot of money. I don't know, maybe nowadays also, I don't know, and others can say, but from what I know, before Uber, taxi drivers used to make, mashallah, very good money, to my knowledge, what I know.
मैं retirement के बारे में बता सकता हूँ.
Yeah. Yes. Like for example, our mother sahab also, he can tell us and stuff like that, But anyways, moving on, right? Let's finish off here. Let's wrap up now. So someone who's in debt, yes, we can give them zakat to pay off their debt. Fi sabilillah. Sabilillah. See, okay, now there are two things, right? Some people, they take sabilillah. Sabilillah means path of Allah Ta'ala. Some people, they say that, you know what, this applies to anyone who's doing any good thing. You're doing any good thing, you can give them a zakat. That's too broad. Then what was the need for Allah Ta'ala to mention all of these other categories? So it doesn't make sense, right? Rather, fi sabilillah generally refers to those who are fighting in the path of Allah Ta'ala. That's the definition. Generally, our scholars, they agree that this is what's referring to someone who is fighting in the path of Allah Ta'ala and they don't have enough money, right? So is it applicable today? Unlikely. But anyways, generally they say that munqati' al-ghuzat, someone who is separated from the army and now he has no money, for example. And so that's his scenario. So you can give him zakat to save himself. Last category, Ibn Sabil. Right? Ibn Sabil is man kana lahu malun fi watani wa huwa fi makanin akhar la shay'a lahu fi. Right? Ibn Sabil, the traveler, what's known as, is someone who has money at home, but now they're separated, they're lost, and they now have no money with them. Okay? They now have no money with them. and they cannot go back home. In our day and time, it's very unlikely. Why? Because I can make a phone call and I can say, hey, listen, mom, dad, brother, sister, and son, whatever, I need some money. Right? And so then my son, my father, my mother, my wife, son, whoever, somebody will give me some money, and I will be able to, they'll Western Union some money to me. They'll, or I have a credit card, for example, or something else. No matter where you are in the world, generally, if you make a few phone calls, inshallah, you speak to your family, generally, inshallah, they'll take care of you. They'll help you get home. Especially, this is regarding the person who has money at home. They have money at home. So you call your bank, oh, I lost my credit card, or whatever, something, they'll help you, for example, right? Those types of scenarios. And also, this is in the scenario. So in our day and age, it's unlikely. This Ibn Sabil also unlikely. That most people, they don't really fall into this category. And fahadi jihad to zakat. These are the categories of zakat. One last line, I'll finish. وَلِلْمَالِكِ أَنْ يَدْفَعَ إِلَى كُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمْ وَلَهُ أَنْ يَخْتَصِرَ عَلَى صِنْفٍ وَاحِدٍ. He says that the one who's giving zakat, he has the ability, he's authorized to give to every single one of these categories, or he can give one category. He is not required to give to every single person of these 8 categories. He does not need to give to everyone. He can give to one category, and that's enough. Imam Shafi'i, according to one opinion, he says that you must give to every single category. I don't know if that's the predominant view nowadays, but that is a dominant view in the madhab, that you must give to every category. Right? It could be that the Shafi'i madhab is now changed, but as I said, don't take Shafi'i madhab from me, take it from a scholar in the Shafi'i madhab, right? But there are other opinions that say that you must give to every one of these 8 categories. So you have $100 of zakat, you must give $10, $10, like this. You must give to every single category, basically. We say no, you give $100 to one person, that's okay. Okay.
You haven't seen that practice nowadays.
Yeah,
Give
yeah.
one person.
Yeah, generally we just give it to like 1 or 2 people. But I always say you should diversify your zakat.
Yeah.
I always say. And I always say, lastly, is that you should give your zakat in a way that you are empowering the person to no longer be reliant on zakat. So instead of giving, let's say you have $1,000 of zakat, right? For example, you take the $1,000. If you give this person $100, fine, he'll survive for 1-2 months, for example. Rather, my suggestion is give him $500 and help him set up a business, or help him like buy an animal, buy a sewing machine, buy something small. Again, especially like in Bangladesh and other countries, you can start off with something small. Right? And for example, recently I helped, for example, sewing machines, right? In some parts of the world, you can give sewing machines as zakat, and people can use women can use those sewing machines to make an income, for example, right? In America, you can make a lot of money with sewing machines. Seriously, like you make a lot of money. All of these jobs are like, now everyone is moving towards IT, right? Everyone's moving towards IT, so no one is doing all the other jobs, so all the labor jobs. So therefore, those labor jobs are more costly and costly and costly. So in America, it's very difficult to get something tailored and so on, right? Back home, every corner you have a darzi, or like they call it odd jobs, right? See, look, one last thing I'll end off in. People should not, na'udhu billah, we should never ever look down on a halal job. Never ever look down on a halal job. No, you shouldn't look down on anybody, period. But halal income is halal income. Right? If a person is earning $1 million, but it's haram, that person, Allah forgive them, but that's a recipe for Jahannam. If a person is making $100, but they're doing halal income, mashallah, that $100 will have khair and barakah in it, and inshallah, that $100 will go very far. Right? So never look down on any type of, any type of job, so long as it's halal, alhamdulillah, be happy with that, any type of job, whatever it is, and make dua to Allah Ta'ala that Allah Ta'ala allows us to have halal income, and that Allah Ta'ala puts khair and barakah in our income as well. Ameen. Any questions lastly? Okay. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.